Thank you, first of all, for having me here today. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the trends that Intel is seeing in big data. I'm going to talk about the importance of business adoption as well as some of the technology trends we've seen. And then I'll talk a little bit about what some of the things Intel's doing to help speed that adoption along and accelerate big data adoption and machine learning as well. So the first thing, let me adjust my headset here. It's going to fall off. One of the things I think that's interesting is what has created this whole cycle, and we call this a virtuous cycle. So, the advent of devices created the need for those devices to be connected to the clouds. The more devices that got connected to the clouds, the more applications were generated to run on those devices. As more applications get generated, more devices get adopted. As more devices get adopted, more cloud systems get deployed, and this cycle just continues to evolve. And that is what is a large part of what is growing the cloud today, and that's what's growing the generation of the large amounts of data that we're seeing in this space. So that said, it has created a huge opportunity, and these numbers are probably already out of date. They're from about a month ago. This is probably no news to anybody here, but over 50 billion devices are projected to be in the Internet of Things and in handheld devices by 2016, creating huge amounts of data. That data is interesting and meaningful, but it's not meaningful unless businesses can figure out how to derive value out of it, either through increasing revenue opportunities, decreasing their costs, or finding ways to increase their business value and their margin gain. So that's the opportunity. As far as how to be able to translate this to end customers, more and more things are generating more and more data. As these customers begin to get more engaged, as these devices begin to get more engaged, as IoT devices begin to get more engaged, it creates more data and opportunity for more solutions. Those solutions are creating a culture of innovation and value driving. And so much of the innovation now is around how do we extract value out of all that data. I know this is a big data and machine learning conference, and there's a lot of focus on machine learning, but we've got to keep our eye on the ball, and the ball is how do I actually use this technology and turn all of this data into real business value. Now, that said, those are big opportunities. There are a couple of challenges standing in our way, or opportunities, I could say. The first one is trust. So there's some people call this security. We tend to look at it more as trust. And there's a couple different aspects of this. Number one is the security of the personal data itself, which I think has been well publicized in the press and will continue to do so. I think there's also an importance, a growing appreciation for the importance of being able to secure as more and more things get connected, especially as Ben indicated with things, important applications like cars. It is important that data be secured as it's transmitted, and that the originator of that, the device that is originating that data, can be accurately authenticated and not spoofed. So there's a lot of work going on in this space right now. It's got a long ways to go. The other one is speed. In the traditional world of BI, we sort of looked in the past at what had happened and present what's happened in the past and forecast what's happening in the future. Now, as these devices are generating data in real time, the value of that data becomes more important, and the longer the time goes by that data is not used, the less valuable it becomes. And so this has led to the emergence of technologies like Spark, as Ben alluded to. But it is increasingly important to businesses to be able to understand what's happening right now, whether it's in a connected car or whether it's with a customer on their website. It is really important for them to understand what's happening, and not only understand what's happening, but be able to understand what that customer needs or what that device needs now. And the speed is, we just see this continuing to increase. We're spending a lot of time, and I'll talk a little bit later about how we're using some of our technology to help increase the speed in this space. And then the last one is scale. The volumes of data are growing. The technologies are new. The existing applications in many IT shops, I spent years in Intel IT. The application infrastructure is not, the traditional application infrastructure is not prepared to deal with the volumes and the scale and the variety of the data that's being presented to it. And so there are a lot of challenges right now on how to implement new technologies like Spark and like Hadoop alongside older technologies, and how do I make sure those two technologies work together to help my business run. We did some work with Gartner and spent some time trying to understand what is stopping enterprises, specifically we talked to IT shops, what is stopping IT shops from adopting big data today? And I'm not going to go through all of these, you can read them yourself, but we put them into three categories. There are business use case or cost constraints, and those are the ones in green. The ones in blue are related to technology challenges, and then the others in yellow are related to sort of operations capability. That's things like, can I deal with these new technologies in my data center? And one of the really interesting things that jumped out is the top thing there is really business use case adoption. And as we drill down into that and talk to companies, we're beginning to understand that they simply don't know how to articulate, they don't know how to estimate, and they don't know how to articulate the value that they're going to be able to drive out of implementing some of these solutions. And so this is stopping, while a lot of people are implementing some of these infrastructures, if you look at Hadoop deployments, they're growing today at a reasonably good rate. Spark's beginning to grow at a reasonably good rate, but the application of those technologies to actual real business use cases is still a hindering factor. And there has been a bit of a slowdown in adoption of big data in general as a result of IT shops struggling with, the CIOs struggling with how to articulate the business value in these new technologies and in this new world. So that's something that we're beginning to focus on quite a bit from my business perspective, is how do we actually help those companies understand how to get that value out of that data? And it's not just the technologies, it's actually being able to identify the key use cases. And again, we'll talk about that in a little bit. So one of the things that Intel has a vision on, and I talked about this earlier with trust, is the importance of securing the devices on the edge, through the network, and up into the cloud. And again, as I think Ben stole a little bit of my thunder. I should have looked at your deck before I went through mine. But one of the things that we're beginning to see is some of that compute and some of those analytics being pushed down to the edge devices. So we've got to look at this as an end-to-end solution. Intel's trying to look at it as an end-to-end solution and figure out where can we help to actually implement technology at the silicon level to be able to secure device data that's coming from sensors through a sensor gateway through a network and into the data center, and how can I authenticate at the silicon level again that data actually came from that, how can I attest that data came from that device? This is a really big focus of ours. I work inside the cloud group at Intel, or the data center group. I've got peers who work inside the IoT group, and we're working very closely together to figure out how to make sure, both from a software and hardware perspective, we can secure that end-to-end story. So a lot of what my job is to figure out how to accelerate this adoption. I mean, Intel Business has grown tremendously over the last few years with the adoption of the cloud, and we're going to continue to see that opportunity grow with big data. But if we can't figure out a way how to clear the path for people, that adoption doesn't happen, and it will, hinder our growth. So we're financially motivated to help the market move along fast here, to try to implement new technologies, to try to partner with the right software companies to help optimize their code, to help secure their solutions so that this big data end-to-end solution stack can be implemented. So we start down at the compute and storage layer. We're doing a lot of things at that infrastructure layer to create a cloud infrastructure that's much more easy to implement. Has anybody in here heard about SDI before? Software-defined infrastructure? Raise a hand, no? Wow. If you think about all the custom devices that are required inside the data center today, a lot of that is being abstracted out of those custom-built boxes into a software abstracted layer. So whether it's a network switch or whether it's a router or whether it's a storage device, those devices are all proprietary devices today. That software is being abstracted, that technology is being extracted out and put in a software layer running on just standard servers. So that allows much more flexibility, that allows innovation on those devices to continue to happen without IT shops having to rip the hardware out and stick a new hardware device back in. So we're doing a lot of work at that cloud infrastructure layer, at the data center infrastructure layer, to help create a much less invasive evolution of technology. And then at that data layer, so how can we, in the big data space, how can we actually help the industry find ways to be able to ingest, store, manage all this type of data that Ben referred to as efficiently and as cheaply as possible and at scale. And a lot of that is why we've led to some of the partnerships we've had. Some of those we've been public about with companies like Cloudera, others we haven't been as public about. But we do a lot of work to help these folks drive more efficiency, more performance, and more enterprise hardening features into their platforms. On top of that is the analytics, and I completely agree with what Ben was saying. This is a lot less mature market than that data layer is today. If you think about it, Hadoop's been around for 10-ish years now. The analytics and the machine learning-based analytics that need to run on top of Hadoop are still relatively nascent compared to Hadoop, and there's lots of work to do to be able to create native analytics applications that can run directly against that Hadoop environment. There are lots of analytics applications that work if you pull your data out of this big data infrastructure layer and stick it into a traditional SQL-type database, but that's inefficient and cost, both time and cost inefficient. So we're doing a lot of work to help identify who are the right analytics companies out there. How do we create open standards and open APIs to allow those companies to interop better together? And who are the key players in that space to make bets on and to help optimize their software to run more efficiently and more better on our hardware. And then lastly are the vertical applications. Thank you. Wow, 5 minutes. Last are the vertical applications, which are actually taking these sort of horizontal functions and actually implementing them for specific vertical markets. I've got a couple examples here of some applications that we have worked on specifically. I won't go into these in detail. If you're more interested, we can talk through them afterwards. Catch me afterwards. But we're trying to demonstrate to people that you can actually get value, you can actually implement end-to-end solutions here. And that's why we're doing some of this work to help sort of demonstrate to the industry that applying different technologies together into a big data environment can actually deliver business value. From a Cloudera perspective, we're working with them. They're sort of one of our flagship partners. We really are spending a lot of time with them, helping them optimize. Intel servers sit in 94% of the data centers today. And so it's really important that to companies like Cloudera that their software is running on top of those servers, and we're spending a lot of time helping to optimize that software layer to be able to run best on our hardware. We're looking for opportunities to actually make hardware changes to accelerate the performance of the software, and we're driving lots of features like silicon-based encryption into the platform. So for example, Cloudera, when they implemented silicon-based encryption, we call it AES-NI, the overhead for encrypting data went from 30% down to 3%. So they're essentially recommending to everybody now that they encrypt all their data that's going into Hadoop, because with just a 3% overhead, it's worth the cost. So those are some of the examples of what we're doing. And oh, by the way, all of the capabilities that we're driving into the Cloudera platform all go up into the open source trunk. So it's not like they're going to be proprietary to Cloudera. It's sort of a vehicle for us to be able to get some of these features and some of these performance improvements into the broader Hadoop and Apache ecosystem. I'm going to skip past this one due to time. Actually, I'll go through that one real quick. As far as the analytics goes, I'll just summarize here. I think, again, if you go back, I have the benefit of being older than probably most of the people in the room. If you go back to the early days of BI and you look at what it took to be able to deliver what we think of as simple BI solutions today, it was not easy. It took developers and programmers. It took specialized skills to be able to deliver what we think of as basic reports. That industry has evolved now to where we're almost just about to an age of self-service BI for business units, right? I stick an enterprise data warehouse with very user-friendly drag-and-drop tools, and they can create their own queries and reports on the fly. That same thing is going to happen to this space of data science and data analysis on top of Hadoop. I just think we're in the early days, but we're really focused on how can there's a limited number of data scientists today because it requires deep domain expertise as well as some strong technical skills. And if we can sort of abstract away some of those technical skills and make the tools more easy for people to use, I essentially can grow my population of people who can do data science by making it more broadly accessible to people who don't have those deep skills. So we're really focused on trying to identify companies and work with them to help simplify the applications to allow data scientists to be able to work on top of a workbench on their desktop to be able to create a model with specific algorithms and different data sets to be able to create and iterate on that model on their desktop, and then once they're ready, simply publish it into production. And wouldn't it be wonderful if you could simply push a button and actually have that model publish itself into production instead of sending it over to the software development team to implement as a new software application. So I know those sound like, to some of you, those sound like far-fetching goals and far-reaching goals, but really, if you just look ahead 5 years or so, I think we're going to be there. Lastly, this is just a slide of some of the companies that Intel's working with, whether they be software providers, whether they be academia. We are very, we're the guys that sit at the lowest layer, the hardware. And we look at that layer and we say, how can we help the software and the tools that run on top of it to run better on the hardware? Because the extent that we can do that, we will have better performing tools, and the better performing tools will create better adoption, and better adoption will create more demand for our hardware. It's really a simple economic equation for us. And so we're very motivated. We have hundreds of developers, 10,000 developers at Intel today. You don't think of us as a software company. 10,000 developers who are working to optimize different third-party software tools to run best on Intel Xeon servers. All right, that's it. Thank you.